Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm senior editor of Robb Report, and looking at our distinguished young gentleman, more like a senior citizen, these young gentlemen are one of the movers and shakers in the watches and jewelry industry. I'm going to start off with Mark, who has been a collector as well as a connoisseur of watches. For years, the industry was quite predictable, I would say. The watch industry was the Centurion brands, the historical legacy brands, but now it's a digital platform, digital sales, the technology has caught up. The watch industry, do we even need it anymore, considering we look at time in our iPhones? What's your opinion about the changes that the watch industry is going through?
So it's an interesting question. And just to give you a little context, so I have this brand called the Armoury. We do high-end classic menswear. And at heart, I'm a luxury retailer. So I'm a dilettante in the watch world, but I speak from the perspective of someone who wants to sell luxury and allow people to enjoy luxury. Now, when it comes to how have the spending habits for watches changed, especially during COVID, we saw a huge uptick in the number of people who are buying watches, people glued to their screens, people sitting at home. Watches are very fascinating things, especially when you can give them a little bit of time. They have a lot of detail that sucks people in, and once they get sucked in, it's a rabbit hole. They don't really come out, which is great. When it comes to luxury retail, I think one of the really important things is the command of the customer's attention, right? And a lot of times, attention just comes down to how much time are you spending with them? This is why, for instance, we have nice-looking stores. This is, for instance, why we have events. And this is also why we have social media. Having those frequent touch points are what allow the customer to convert into a paying customer, into someone who's actually bought something from you. So I would also say, with all of these new customers coming into the market, the perception of what a watch is within the inventory of the things that a person owns has shifted a little bit into not just this is kind of a beautiful piece of craft that I want to admire, but this is now also an accessory. People are buying these in a quantity that matches someone who might own multiple ties or might own multiple pieces of jewelry. That's kind of my thoughts on it.
So Austen, when you started off and social media and social platform wasn't as huge as it is now, I was wondering how seriously did veteran industry people take your business in the initial years, and how have the tides changed?
Yeah, it's been, it changed a lot. I would say, I started my career, indirectly through my own Instagram page, Horror Loop. And I was actually anonymous for the first 4 years because I was a young person. I grew up in Shanghai in China. And when I didn't have an anonymous account, no one cared what I thought. They were like, oh, you're just some kid, I don't care about what you think. And so that kind of forced me to make my page anonymous. And through that, I built an organic following. And eventually, in the beginning, brands did not care at all. But I feel like once they realized that Gen Z and the Apple Watch was the kind of thing that reinvigorated this love for watches, they started to pay attention. And if you realize and if you notice, watch brands were one of the latest luxury brands to join Instagram and to join social media in general. But I do feel like right now they're investing heavily. If you look at the marketing campaigns that many of the group brands are doing, and also the three kings, AP, Patek, and Rolex, a lot of what they're doing is trying to attract Gen Z. And I think this is a time where you don't need to be from the watch industry. You can be from anywhere around the world, and you can make a living, or you can enter the watch industry because of tools such as social media. And it made this very traditionally exclusive industry more inclusive, in a sense, where information is now available to literally everyone with an internet connection. And that wasn't the case even just 10 years ago. I remember 10 years ago, all the information, I had to buy books in China. It was watch forums like Purist Pro, Panaristi, Rolex forums, and people were talking in reference numbers. There was no user-generated content. It was a very, very different landscape compared to what we see now. Right now, social media is kind of the top of the funnel, kind of the first it's kind of the first touch point for new releases now. It's not the brand websites, it's not traditional media, it's social media. And anyone who's denying that, I'm sorry, you're wrong.
Okay, now the trouble with social media for me is reliability. Now, TikTok ban was going to take into effect in America soon. It's already banned in 14 countries. There was a thing called Vines, which was really big back in the day, Insta Stories. Facebook is now just recycling conspiracy theories. You know, social media has not been that reliable as a platform because it's open to change. Does that worry you? Does that concern you?
I feel like if you're more aware of what's going on around the world, I mean, if you take Wristcheck, for example, we're very, we focus heavily on social media. We have a great presence on Instagram. We're also on TikTok, but obviously for our followers in China, we have to use Xiaohongshu, we have to use Douyin, we have to use these type of platforms, right? And so I feel like regardless how the landscape changes in the future, there will always be platforms that are catered to catered to different geographies. And so as long as you're nimble and as long as you adapt with the times, I don't see any issue because the type of content and the content form that lives on all of these platforms is relatively similar.
Mark, I've been covering watches for 21 years, and anytime there's an important watch on sale, I get like a book. I get information, the historical relevance, the artistic merit of it, the collab, the whatnot. Does the new generation want a history lesson along with their watch? I mean, when it comes to important watch sales, is this really important?
I think, especially, well, I apologize for sounding a little sexist. It's only because I know men best. Men like to know these details, right? Like men like to know the context, and men like to know the history. I would assume women do as well. I unfortunately don't have enough female customers to provide real data on that. But people still love narratives, right? People understand the world via narratives. And when you have the history of a brand, the history of a product, the design process, the construction details, it makes a big, big difference to their appreciation of the watch. And also, I think that it's the best way to make a customer sticky. Like, the more the customer understands about what you do, the closer he's going to feel to you, and the more likely he's going to come back to you in future.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, Ronny is here, fresh off the success of $1 billion sales in Christie's jewelry. It's B with billion. One of the things that we spoke about earlier was now you can buy and sell jewelry for like $1 million, $2 million or more. My generation, if there was more than $10,000, we used to think about it. But the industry has clearly changed. What is digital platform and high-end sales in jewelry? How is that going to affect it?
I think Gen Z is increasingly engaged with the luxury market through the online platform, and they prioritize convenience and accessibility for the most. So at Christie's, we just finished the highest online jewelry sale in last month, which we are very proud of. And also back in 2021, in our New York online sale, we managed to sell over 28-karat diamond for over $2 million US, so which is also great achievement, through the online platform.
Now, I've been listening for generations that jewelry is investment. My mother, my sister, they like to buy pieces and they always say, this is an investment thing. Now you see the sales side of it. Is jewelry a really good investment idea?
I think whether vintage or sign, as long as jewelry comes with exceptional craftsmanship, unique design, or significant provenance, are sought after in the market. And in terms of investment, I think the most key strategy point is you need to love the jewelry first. You need to appreciate the jewelry. So maybe you can gain the financial in the long terms. But and also I think it is very important to seek the professional advice through the trust merchant or auction house. At Christie's, we have very strong international specialists around the world, and people can always seek our advice, to establish their jewelry collection. Yes.
Austen, you'll be collaborating with one of our other speakers, Nadine. One of the drops was last night. Tell us about, are you going into jewelry as well as watches? What's happening?
I would say that's a little bit far-fetched. I would say the collaboration is still basically I mean, it's based upon a watch, right? And yeah, I mean, Nadine's a great friend. I absolutely love what she does. And I mean, at Wristcheck, it's more about trying to do things that are different and cool. I mean, for example, with this collaboration, it's doing something that's typically frowned upon in the watch industry, which is customizing your watch, but doing it in a way that, you know, that actually puts in craftsmanship and time, and there's a lot of savoir-faire that goes into making these hands, and they're all made out of 18K solid gold. It was hard for us to also figure out how to make the hands and rulers. If you guys don't know what we're talking about, you can go on Nadine's Instagram or our Instagram, and you can see the photo. It's pretty cool. But at Wristcheck, it's more about just doing things that haven't really been done in the watch industry. And so a few years ago, we did a collaboration with AP where we did a global design contest to wrap up the 50th anniversary of the Royal Oak. And this was something that the luxury industry had never really done before. Typically, the luxury industry is the one that's telling the customer, hey, you should buy this. And for the 50th anniversary, we thought that it would be really cool if we flipped the script and had the whole world be part of that celebration. And so anyone could design the Royal Oak and submit it and be part of that celebration. And the brand would also be able to get very valuable insight for what their customers around the world wanted. And so for us at Wristcheck, you know, collaborations is something that's part of our core, but it's always quality over quantity. We don't ever want to do more than 2-3 collaborations a year. Because our core focus is still obviously growing the marketplace and growing our business. But it is something that, you know, adds a little bit of, you know, fun, excitement, and it keeps us closer to the culture as well, which is something that I care a lot about.
You know, in polite society, we don't talk about age, wage, and prices. I feel like there's been a cultural shift when it came to talking about price point, when it came to watches. Austen, Mark, I was wondering if you could please shed some light on the changes about what the internet is doing with publicizing numbers, how much something costs and how it affects its influence, or how one covets a watch because of its price tag.
I mean, pricing is a very complicated issue. I mean, it's a reflection of the status it confers on a person. It's a reflection of their spending power. I think one interesting thing, and Ronny, you'd probably agree with me on this, that's been happening over the last 10 years is, if you look at the way auction houses used to work, they were relatively discreet. People didn't like to know who was buying what. Auctions today are much more flashy, much more about the price, and the higher the price, the more value you've added for the purchaser. I mean, it sets a public benchmark, and it helps to promote, if ever that person wants to sell, the next time he sells his price. And I think this is a very interesting shift because it's also mirroring what we're seeing on social media, right? Like 15 years ago, none of us probably would have taken a selfie and put it online. But now we're just so much more comfortable with these public selves, and even with the financial public self, like even allowing that to be shown.
Okay. Can Gen Z save Swiss brands? It's one of the leading headlines last week that came out. Gen Z, are you going to save Switzerland?
Yes, I think so. I think that's the short answer. But I do think, you know, I mean, Gen Z does have the longest lifetime value, right? They're going to be making more and more money for the next 15, 20 years. And they were exposed to luxury a lot earlier than the generation before them. And I mean this by saying I truly believe that Gen Z are the smartest consumers that have ever existed, because our generation was the first generation that grew up with access to the world. In terms of you know, my mom, for example, she grew up in Shanghai. When she grew up, she could only buy what was available in the local shop. If she wanted to buy shoes, it was shoes from the local shop. If she wanted to buy clothes, it was clothes from the local shop. Food was also local produce, right? Our generation was not like that. If I wanted to buy something from America, if I wanted to buy something from Europe, if I wanted to buy something from Africa, South America, I could do that. And so because of that, I really do think that Gen Z is, they're very, very smart in terms of when they're making luxury purchases. And that's something that I think luxury brands need to also be aware of. They see through the BS a lot easier as well. But I do think that Apple is probably the company to thank the most for reviving watches for our generation. Apple and social media. And I say Apple because I was in college the first year that the Apple Watch was released. And it was very, very clear that throughout my entire life, I was kind of that only person in class that was wearing a watch. It was a Casio G-Shock or a Swatch, but I was always the only kid, maybe a few other kids, wearing a watch, and that changed only in college after the Apple Watch was released. I remember my 400 people lecture hall going from the first year in college having less than 10% of the lecture hall wearing something on their wrist, to 1 year later having more than 50% of the class wearing something on their wrist. Apple was also doing a lot of promotions for students and stuff like that when they released the watch. And so, in my opinion, when I saw that, I thought this is going to be the resurgence of the Swiss watch industry because it brought back attention to the wrist. And part of human nature is wanting to be different, wanting to be individual. The Apple Watch looks the same. And so eventually, I thought that these people would want something more. I thought the Apple Watch was a complementary product to traditional watches, not a replacement. And that's what we see today. When people go to the gym, when people are outdoors, they wear the Apple Watch. When they're in a serious meeting, at a nice event, they wear a nice watch, right? It did not replace anything. It maybe just destroyed the watches in the same price point as the Apple Watch, right? But yes, I do think that Gen Z, because Gen Z is so interested in watches, coupling the Apple Watch with social media, 20 years ago, how would you know what your favorite celebrity was wearing? You didn't. Now you see it every single day. You see their outfits every single day. You see the watches that they're wearing every single day. It's essentially subliminal brainwashing into buying luxury, right? But because of that, Gen Z got exposed to this a lot younger. They get exposed to this stuff when they're 15, 16, 17. Not saying that's a good or bad thing, right? But it's just what happens. And so because of that, I do think that Gen Z, they value luxury a lot more, and it's also because cost of living is very high in major cities around the world. It's very hard for Gen Z to foresee themselves to own property, unlike their parents, and so they spend their disposable income on things instead of paying their mortgage or buying a car, because you don't need to buy a car anymore, right? You can Uber everywhere or take public transport. So
Our car panel will disagree, but go on.
Sorry.
Sorry, Ronny. Is the digital platform going to level the playing field? There's a cap right now on how high you can bid online, right? For especially like extremely rare jewelry. Is a change coming in Christie's?
Yes, I think even in our traditional lifestyle, there are lots of online bidding in this, like after COVID, people are getting used to bid in online, not just like bidding in a room or bidding through the telephone. So I think it is quite a big change compared to the pre-COVID period.
Is there a cap on the number, like how high you can bid?
No, as long as you can pass through our credit, then I think no matter how high the amount, people can all bid in online. Okay. Yes.
Mark, you've studied the market, you've seen the ups and downs. Would you say that you're optimistic about what the next 12 months ahead is going to be like for the watch market, or are you suspicious?
I mean, life is a lot about regression to the mean, right? Like you have the peaks, you have the lows, but eventually everything settles as an average. We are coming off of a historic peak. Like, let's face it, during COVID, the market was incredibly good to the watch industry, and now it's just okay, and life is okay as a result. I do hope that, the gray market recedes a little bit during this time. I do hope that retail pricing will find a new level that's comfortable both for brands and consumers. And I think that if you look at the new releases, like the new releases are still very interesting, very exciting. I think one interesting thing that is just about starting to emerge, so for instance, last week I was taking care of an auction at Philips. Like I was helping out an auction at Philips called the Tokyo auction. And this was the first ever Japanese themed auction. So everything in the auction was either sourced from a Japanese collector, was a Japan special edition, or was made by a Japanese brand or was made by a Japanese independent watchmaker. And the Japanese independent watchmakers cleaned up. Like, those results for those watches were unbelievable. I will give you an example. There's a brand called Otsuka Low-Tech. The Otsuka Low-Tech Model 6 sold at retail normally for about $3,500 US, and that same watch just went for $65,000 US. And so it just goes to show like how much interest there is now in watches beyond Switzerland. And I think Japan is the first country to watch because I think they're doing a lot of interesting things. But I also think that Chinese watches will actually be going somewhere relatively soon as well. There are now starting to be really great Chinese, I wouldn't say high-end luxury watch brands in the traditional sense, but certainly serious watch companies and watchmakers out there. Barron's is a great example, and the other one would be Qinggan. Qinggan's work as an independent watchmaker is unbelievably good, and I highly recommend everyone have a look at that.
It's interesting you mentioned Japan because there was a particular Swiss company that collaborated with a Japanese museum imposing vintage Japanese art onto their limited edition watches and try to sell it. Now, the cynic in me said like, oh, they're pandering, catering to a market, it's a limited edition, they know this is going to sell well. Or is it cultural appreciation, or is it, it's like a sales pitch, like, oh, this is going to sell. What do you think? Like, are you cynical about collabs like that, or you think like, no, that's just sensible marketing?
I like that sort of product. I like that sort of marketing. I mean, I think what's important in luxury is that what you're getting, what the consumer is getting, is something that's rare, special, unusual, something you don't see very often. You know, and one way that you can kind of isolate and make something special is to be able to genuinely say, this is an authentic thing. This is a thing that could only be made by these people in this place. Like, that automatically makes it rare. That automatically isolates it. And so when you do collabs like that, you know, that are leaning on, say, a certain country's culture, you know, that also is making it rare in that same mechanism.
For Gen Z, does an art collab make sense? Are you interested in it? If it's like a vintage watch and says it's a rare, like, artist has made it, does that interest you, or are you looking at the technology, what it can do? Can it measure your heartbeat?
I think we're very far away from mechanical watches being able to measure our heartbeat, sadly. But that would be great. I think, we welcome everything, kind of, right? I think we appreciate, just recently, AP collabed with KAWS. A few years ago, Hublot collabed with Murakami. Obviously, these are more modern artists, but I do think that Gen Z really appreciated those collabs, right? I mean, they did very well, not only on the primary, but the KAWS isn't on the secondary yet, but at least the Hublot Murakami is selling. It's one of the few Hublots that are way, way above retail. And so that is something that probably speaks a lot to the artist, right? And also the brand itself. And so, yeah, I do think this is something that we appreciate for sure, but it also needs to be organic, right? And it needs to be authentic. I think any collaboration where it seems forced is something that Gen Z can see through. And so I think that when it comes to collaborations, what you're talking about, when it comes to maybe doing a China limited edition, maybe don't put just the Zodiac on the front and then try to make another limited edition to sell to another 1,000 Chinese people, right? Because it's like we've seen this for 25 years and nothing has changed. And then you mark it up a little bit just for the Chinese people, right? But it's like, yeah, those are collabs that are not as authentic. It was cool the first few times, but not 20 times.
Okay.
Or red, right? Red.
Ronny, are you optimistic about jewelry sales that are coming up in the next 12 months? I know Christie has a very busy timetable coming up. Are you looking forward? Are you more careful? What's the plan?
I think despite the macroeconomy still not stable this year, but we still managed to sell over 1 billion Hong Kong dollars jewelry this year. So I think this is also is a big achievement for like jewelry industry, because the overall market is not too optimistic. But for us, we are quite cautiously optimistic even for the next year, as long as we're sourcing the right jewelry with the right price. people were always looking for the highest quality jewelry all time. Yes.
And finally, Austen, Young Z, are you optimistic about the watch market that's coming up in the next 12 months?
I think we're lucky at Wristcheck that we're consignment only. So for our business, I'm extremely optimistic, but I do think that the industry is going to be very interesting in the coming 12 months. I think the strong brands are going to get much stronger, and the brands that are struggling are going to sadly probably struggle a lot more. And so, but that's on a primary level. On a secondary level, you know, Christie's, you guys are consignment too. You know, for people that are consignment that don't own their inventory, I think it will be completely fine.
And that's our time. Gentlemen, thank you so much. And have a wonderful day ahead, you guys. There's some amazing talks coming up as well. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you. Thank you for listening.